they can't look a franchisee in the eye, this is the social contract, and say, you know what? Those goals that are elusive, that have eluded you thus far, that capital that will be very difficult for you, if not sometimes impossible to replace. If we do business together, that goals will become a reality with a high degree of probability and predictability. And if you can't say that, don't take the money.
Welcome to the I Fired My Boss franchise podcast. My name's Dan Claps, founder and CEO of Franchise Playbook, a franchisor platform where we create, own, and operate dynamic franchise brands in the mobile services space. And my life's goal is to help people just like you fire their boss and become a business owner.
And I'm Christian Dadulak, top franchise consultant and co-founder of Real Franchising, a leading franchise consulting firm. And together, we're on a mission to help people fire their boss, hire themselves, and live the American dream through franchise ownership.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the I Fired My Boss podcast, formerly the Franchise Founders podcast. This is your co-host, Dan Claps, here with a special guest. I'll tell you a little backstory on our guest here. He's been an influence in the franchise industry for a very long time. And for me, about 10 years ago, I think he remembers this story. I was part of a franchise consulting group, and he gave an incredible lesson on how to help people find what kind of franchise they should own. And we talked on the phone. I was very fortunate. He was willing to talk to me for a little bit. And he got to know me being from the Northeast and being Italian and just my personality. And he said, I could tell you would take a bullet for somebody, figuratively in business. And so you got to make people feel that first before you ever even talk about what you do or how you do it. And I'll always remember that. And our guest today is Joe Matthews, highly regarded in the space. How you doing, Joe?
Good. Thank you for remembering that story. And thank you for growing up in a similar neighborhood where there would be some context to that story. You know, the lower middle income kind of mob related neighborhoods that I think we both grew up in. That's fantastic.
Yeah, for me, it was probably more my parents grew up in Brooklyn, and I grew up in the middle class. But I definitely have seen that side of my dad. You know, he's a tough guy.
Yeah,
but or used to be. I think he's gotten a lot softer in his older age.
We all do.
Well, cool, Joe. So I was hoping maybe if you could just share with our audience a bit about your background and kind of how you got to here.
You know, I've been in franchising since 1981. And like anybody that got into franchising in the 80s or 90s, you know, the current leadership really kind of franchise, we all got into it by accident, right? So, you know, my story, I was a fine arts major and I drew a picture one day and I looked at it, I said, I'm never going to make any money as an artist. So I did the hurry up offense, got a degree in marketing, read a story about some local sandwich shop that wanted to take on McDonald's. He had a few hundred units, ran down there with a resume, and they hired me. I was their third franchise salesperson in their department and their 40th employee. And it turned out to be Subway. You know, so I was part of the run up of Subway. And, you know, back then, you know, the franchise thought leadership was like, hey, I could own them or I can franchise them. I'll franchise. Like franchising is a distribution strategy. I get vanilla or chocolate. I can own them or I can franchise them. You know, and as we got into franchising, you know, more and more, you realize that's not complex enough. You know, franchising is way more than a distribution strategy. You know, franchisees are a competitive advantage in the marketplace, and franchising seems to play by its own rules, right? So, you know, what is the business of franchising? I think people, you know, my generation of leaders, you know, 40 to 60, franchising is never done for the franchisor, which franchisors do for franchisees, which is codify the model, right? So there's no franchisor model. Like, show me the model that will take somebody from 1 unit to 1,000. It doesn't exist, right?
Right.
You know, so we kind of spent our careers trying to learn what makes franchising tick, kind of across industries, across investment levels, across categories. So I started my business in about 23 years ago, the Franchise Performance Group, really to be a think tank. I wanted to draw my experience not from 3 brands in the same category, but 300 brands, in every category. And I'm not at 300, but we're over 150 brands I've worked with since then. And I would say in every category except hotels. And we just try to codify. My particular specialty would be franchise development and culture strategy. But franchise development is just, we would take a more recruiter approach. So I would say franchise development is not a sales role, it's talent acquisition, right? So that the most appropriate training for that role for me would be executive recruitment, not sales. Not to say that there's not salesmanship in the model, but it's sales inside an executive recruiter box as opposed to recruiting inside a sales box. But I would say the industry is not going in that direction. I think they kind of sell hard. I think they kick the can down the road for operations. There are a number of reasons for that, but so I don't always agree with the general overriding philosophy of franchising because so I would say I'm a franchise philosopher, kind of also, on top of doing consulting work and lead gen and fran dev work.
No, I appreciate you sharing. It's interesting, right? Seeing the ebb and flow of the direction of the industry from 1981 to 2024.
Yeah, I would say we're going into, there's probably 3 generations of thought, right? So you get the original, it's like Fred DeLuca was my first boss, and he would say it's a distribution model, own them or sell them, right? And then I think our generation was franchising as a business unto itself, right? And how does that work? And I think we're going into franchising 3.0, especially with all the influx of private equity, value-added private equity with a specialty in franchising. Yeah, I think there's a movement towards perfecting the model. So I think it's kind of an exciting time for franchising because it hasn't been done before.
Yeah, there's different schools of thought, right? Like because one of the things I've learned is I haven't decided on my theory on this yet because there's one side of me that says franchising when you know it. Like I think I could go and run a different franchise company pretty easily, knowing what I know from running Voda. But on the other end, I actually recently just said to someone, you may know franchising, but you don't know my business. I'm in the restoration business in 2024 in franchising. In Voda. And there's factors that make my business different than every other franchise. Just like you said, there is no really one way to do it because we listen to the franchisees and we adapt based on their needs. And so it's interesting. I'm torn on which one I would.
Yeah, I would say that categorically, there is real one way to do it, franchising. Because I would say you're in 2 different models, Dan, right? I would say you're in the consumer-facing model. That would be Voda, and that's restoration. That's all the technical aspects of what you're delivering, right? And then you're also in the business of franchising. So let me define it, right? So, an FPG, in the book I just wrote called The Ultimate Guide to Responsible Franchising, we don't even have good franchising definitions. That's how I think backwards we are in our thinking. Yeah, so we define it as recruiting, training, and developing, resourcing, and leading a team of entrepreneurs to build a brand. So if you agree with that definition, what's missing? The technical aspects or whatever the service offering or product offer is, right? So we would say franchising, you would be 2 businesses, right? Water restoration, business 1, franchising, business 2. And I think business 2 is transferable to pretty much any category, any brand if you master it. And then business 1 is specific, like, water restoration would be specific to your company.
Let's talk about the book. So it's coming out, I think at the time we're recording this, did you say tomorrow?
It's available on the 15th, tomorrow.
And what really provoked you to write the book and what's kind of the context of the book?
Yeah, I mean, 2 things. Wiley called me, which is a $2 billion publisher, and they said, we don't have a title in franchising. Do you want to write one? A $2 billion publisher calls you. That doesn't happen every day. So, yeah, I'm also kind of a man of faith. And I'm thinking, if that isn't a God thing, right? Okay, then I just assume it was something I was supposed to do. And then the second piece, and oddly, again, more of a God thing. I had just taken all the intellectual property rights back from Street Smart Franchising. So he's going to self-publish a title using the Street Smart Franchising and then just updating the content. So it's kind of it was a nice blend of timing. And then the third piece was I hate to say it, I think the school of thought in franchising is regressing. Like I think franchising has become more franchisor centric and even franchise broker centric as part of that, and at the expense of the franchise candidate, it actually increases their risk. So I don't think we're promoting the most franchisee friendly version of franchising, and that's concerning to me as somebody who's moving towards the twilight of my career, right? So now there's some talk about responsible franchising and what that means. And I'm hoping it's just not talk, but what's missing is any definition about what responsible franchising means. What are tactics? What are strategies? What's even executable, in responsible franchising? So I decided, it's maybe one of the last things I'll do in franchising. Let me take responsible franchising as a philosophy and give it some definitions. I wrote 75,000 words on responsible franchising. And there's two audiences, right? Franchisor, like how do I be more responsible? And then the franchise candidate, how do I know I'm doing business with an ethical and responsible franchisor? And I'll use responsible and ethical interchangeably because I do think my definition of responsible franchising has to do with business ethics.
So what is the foundation of that?
Yeah, so I would say foundationally, couple foundational principles. So one, I would say when franchising is done right, the franchisor doesn't own the brand, the community does, right?
Yeah.
So the brand is
Great point.
separate and distinct from the franchisor, kind of like Michelangelo's, David is kind of separate and distinct from Michelangelo. People build relationships with it on their own terms, right? And to say, even try to reduce it down to say, hey, the sculpture of David or the Sistine Chapel is just a sum total of Michelangelo's brushstrokes, right? It really diminishes what's really there, right? So the brand is very synergistic, I think. And you're saying, well, who are the stakeholders of the brand or who are the brand owners? I would say it's divided among the franchisor, who's the genesis of it. Okay, the franchisee, who's the execution arm, the supplier who supports it all, and then the customer makes it all possible, right? And everybody has got to extract value. And everybody is, when it's done right, actually adds value. And the net total is interesting. It's always different. If it's done, business is done that way, the brand becomes different than what the franchisor intends. Kind of like Harley Davidson. They built motorcycles, but at the end of the day, right, the customer gets involved and establishes this whole lifestyle category called Harley Davidson, right? So I always say there's brands and there's cults, right? So
I was going to say Harley Davidson's like basically a cult.
A cult, and Honda might be a brand. Honda motorcycles might be a brand. Like I like cult brands, right? So I think every franchisor should, in that definition of brand cult, should try to establish one. So that's principle number one, what's the brand and who owns it? And then secondly, I would say the franchisor exists to add more value to the franchisee's royalty stream than they're extracting in royalty dollars. And that the franchisee exists to add more value to the customer than they're taking in price, right? And then the supplier exists to support that flywheel. And as long as everybody's committed to adding more value than they're extracting, in my experience, something interesting happens. They all get more value than they put in, right? It's a flywheel effect, right? And then the brand has a tendency to operate under its own momentum. So I would say that those are the two principles, right? So then, if you operate from there, it's not a franchisor-centric model. And a franchisor-centric model, like Subway used to be, it would be my brand, my process, my system, my customers, my website, my system, my technology. And then where's the franchisee in all that, right? They're a sharecropper. It really diminishes the time, money, energy that a franchisee and collective genius, quite frankly, that the franchisees bring to the table.
No, it's so interesting. Joe, I'll tell you a quick story. When we launched Voda, we launched in April of 2023, and we had spent since October of 2022 to April of 2023 acquiring the brand, putting together the leadership team, putting together the technology. We spent 7 figures in putting everything together. And we launched in April of 2023, thinking it would be the next big thing, the next, Serve Pro. And I always like to think about the show Shark Tank when they have an idea and the sharks don't like it. And the owner gets upset saying, well, I worked my butt off. And the sharks say, we don't care, right? It's the same thing, right? The market doesn't care how hard you worked. And so we launch in April and nothing happens. In June, May passes, we don't sell a franchise. June passes, we don't sell a franchise. I'm losing 70 grand a month in payroll and thinking like, I screwed up my life here. I'm going to have to go get a job at, Starbucks or something and rent in a cot in the back, office. And I go to a conference and I see a franchisor speak, and it's a conference of franchisors. And he tells this story about how when he was going through building the brand, they went through hell. And he said to his wife, honey, the difference between us going broke and super broke is pretty much the same. We might as well go all in. And so that hit me in the chest. I flew home and I said to my team, let's go all in. Let's just take it to the next level. And we sold our first franchise in July, and we've awarded a lot since. But I tell people the reason why is to this exact thing we learned that you're talking about, which was when no one was buying our franchise, we would ask them honestly why. And then they would tell us like, you didn't do this, you don't have that. And we wouldn't take it defensively. We would go and we would add that element that they told us. And I truly believe that that's what my brand is succeeding with now, is we don't pretend to be smart at everything. We got 65 people. Each one of them has spent their life in a different discipline. I just had a franchisee come in with an HR background. We didn't have that knowledge to the way that he does. Another one in the trucking industry.
Right.
And so when you think about like when I think about Voda, I think about this box or this circle. Maybe you won't be able to see it. Oh no.
Yeah, I can't say it's disappearing. Yeah.
And all these are just building it with me. I really like the way you explain that.
Yeah. Look, that's one of the reasons why you franchise, right? It's irrefutable that franchisees will execute at a higher level than just say a general manager, right? So last I checked, this might be old data, but it was only about 15 or 16% of private sector businesses were franchised, but they're capturing 50% of the available market, right? And you say, well, what's the difference? I would say it's the franchisee, not the franchisor. It's the little extra.
What were the stats again? 50% of the market they capture.
It was the old IFA stat. Yeah. I think it was 70% of these private and service sector brands were franchised, but captured 50% of the available market.
Wow. So that goes to show when someone in, like, for example, home services, there's a lot of competition, but there's only about 16 to 17% typically that are franchised that are getting 50%. There's another 50% that's mom and pops, which represents 80% of the market of mom and pops.
Well, what I'm saying is would be general chain operations, right? So
right.
So in other words, it's the franchisee going up against the general manager employee, and you just get a little extra with the franchisee, and it translates into a competitive advantage into the marketplace if it's done right.
If you take home services, for example, right, in a town, is let's say 16 to 17% of the businesses are franchise companies, Serve Pro, in my example, Serve Pro, Voda, whatever, getting 50% of the market. The other 50% of the market and 80% of locations, are you saying those are mom and pops? They're still owner operated, or you're saying a lot of them are chains? Because in food, I'd understand that, but what about in home services?
Well, I can't speak to individual sectors because I didn't see the data on that. I'm just saying kind of a sweeping generalization. But I mean, conceptually, it makes sense, right? Okay, give me somebody who's making 65, 70 grand and gets benefits and a little bit of profit share, put them up against somebody whose house is on the line. What do you get?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it just conceptually on face value, it makes sense.
If you'd like our help investing in a franchise at no cost to you, head over to ifiredmybosspodcast.com and fill out the form to schedule a free consultation.
What I've learned in home services specifically, because that's the world I live in, is that even the franchisors of the past were selling home service concepts to the worker that saved up some money and bought a location, whereas now you see these more affluent people buying home service businesses competing. I always say we're not competing with the Serve Pro you see on the Super Bowl. We're competing with the local owner and their standards of work that they provide.
That's right. Yeah. And sometimes when chains get bigger, especially franchise brands, they bring in professional management who operate from a chain store mentality, right? Or a pyramid mentality, and then you lose culture, right? So then the franchisee gets pushed to the bottom, of the pyramid just above the customer, right? And I would say that's the wrong way to think about it. I see franchising as an inverted pyramid. The bigger you are, the more market intelligence you have, a great execution from franchisees, and they should be feeding market intelligence to the franchisor who weaponizes and prioritizes needs and priorities according to obviously budgets and goals and objectives. Okay. And then gets the franchisees out tools, processes, and systems that they've already communicated is missing. So I see franchising as having a baked in idea farm driven by the franchisees. And I don't see enough franchisors leveraging or weaponizing franchisees. They have the franchisee committees, right? They're not decision-making bodies, they're advisory, right? Until the franchisor hears something they don't like. And then they're not even advisory, right? It's like, they just do what they want. And, you just see that kind of top-down ivory tower mentality a bit. Usually around 200 to 400 is when you start baking in middle management. And then the top really doesn't hear from the franchisees anymore. They hear from middle management. Things get filtered. They lose that entrepreneurial edge. So.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I'll add to it that when a brand is a rocket ship or when a brand is growing fast, I remind my team of this all the time. The people that invested their money with us, they're pretty smart people. They saved up a good amount of money. Candidly, sometimes have a larger net worth, or often have a larger net worth than maybe someone at corporate, right? Yeah. And so I understand that we feel this feeling of like we're growing, we're Voda, we're this rocket ship. But just you can't lose sight of the fact that you're part of a rocket ship as is the franchise owner. And a lot of times, again, they're more experienced in business than maybe even we are, right? And so, or some of us are. And so, I really appreciate what you're saying because
why are their investment dollars subservient to yours, right? And I'm saying that because I don't think they are, right? So I think. The franchisors need to move away, I think, from franchisor-centric models and franchisor protectionism, right? Like even the franchise agreement, Dan, let me ask you, your career franchising professional, you've done this a long time, right? Does the franchise agreement define the relationship and how franchising works?
Does the franchise agreement? So, my answer is that agreement is there. We try very hard not to leverage the agreement and we try to make decisions without going to the agreement. But I guess the way the agreement is written is definitely sided to the franchisor versus the franchise.
Yeah, and it's what you go to when everything's breaking down, right?
Sure.
It's the last resort. So what makes franchising work? If it's not a legal contract, then it's got to be a social contract, right? So what is the social contract that makes franchising work? And that's what I'm calling responsible franchising, the social contract that really drives franchising. But what are the terms of this social contract, Dan, in your company? You said it.
Yeah, I know it's a rhetorical question. My answer would be, I think the social contract is mutual respect between the franchisor and the franchisee, and understanding the lanes that our job at this size is to be a steward of the idea farm, bring it up to the top, help prioritize, and then execute on one or two things, block and tackle to make those things happen, for the system. And the franchise owner's, role is to execute on the model and also bring up the ideas, but knowing that they have to bring the ideas and then trust the system, not trust me, not trust the leadership team, trust Voda.
So very good. Well, let's pursue stewardship as an idea, because that's what I flush out in the book, The Ultimate Guide to Responsible Franchising, right? So what's the franchisor really a steward of? It's the franchisee's dreams and capital. Hey, just hang out with that. That is an awesome responsibility. A steward of, right? It's the processes and systems and the brand. The franchisor has an awesome responsibility. And if they can't look a franchisee in the eye, this is the social contract, and say, you know what? Those goals that are elusive, that have eluded you thus far, right? And that capital that will be very difficult for you, if not sometimes impossible to replace, okay? If we do business together, okay, that goals will become a reality with a high degree of probability and predictability, right? And if you can't say that, don't take the money. And I don't think, I will tell you, like, I'll just talk about responsible franchising. In my career, we have mystery shops, at least 100 franchise salespeople. And we have a process for that. You know, we've never been interviewed effectively, other than the 5 pre-qualifying questions you'd ask how much money do you have? When do you want to start a business? Yeah. Have you ever looked at anything before? And why'd you say no? And just those self-serving franchisors, but never once. Okay. Were they looking for transferable skills or relevant experience? Or how capital burn rate or transition capital, or even create any line of sight, okay, between the candidate's goals and objectives, okay, and then how the business ramps. Nothing. And it's so obscene to me that that's the case, that not once has that ever happened. Now, if they were interviewing a secretary for their departments, they would get a more thorough interview than a franchise candidate. I'm not saying every franchisor does that. I am saying every franchise salesperson that I mystery shopped, and again, they're calling me if they got a problem, right? Okay. But I'm saying there's a system problem in franchising, because I don't know what the exception is and I don't know what the rule is. But if I had to guess, with the people I meet in franchise, I would say the rule is, okay, that the people are there to sell a license, and they're not there to acquire talent and match people to opportunity. And I think that's a violation of the highest order of the social contract you and I just discussed.
I would say that the franchise development person, without the clear leadership and guidelines of what the franchisor is looking for, like, it starts at the top in that situation, right?
So, for example, I think the fish always thinks from the head. Yeah.
Right. For example, in Voda, we identified our franchise owner as the mayor of the town. It's a very specific kind of personality. It's basically a salesperson. We have had exceptions when someone is good at managing a salesperson. They're operationally inept. They have capital, and they say, look, this is my plan. I'm going to bring in a salesperson. I can manage them, though, right? That's a skill in its own. But what we've learned is that alone, if we can just do that, we rule out of a lot of the gray area, because we know selling in our business model is very important. Secondarily is obviously capital. If you got the capital and you got the time and you've got the personality, everything else gets a little bit more ambiguous, right? Because I will say, on the opposite end, the Traverse, I don't always know who's going to be good or bad. I sometimes think someone will be and won't be, and vice versa, right? But I think if you can get really tight on what you need, which is, an example for home services, an ability to sell, or really any business, I think that's important.
There's always risk, right? Like, it's nothing certain. But again, it starts with, if you want to talk about responsible recruiting inside of responsible franchising, for me, it would be, you know with who you're looking for, right? And that's culture, that's capital, it's transferable skills and experience, in which you're calling the mayor of the town, which you're also called somebody who has some sales skills. Well, it's pretty easy to ascertain whether someone is a career salesperson or has sales skills or has the aptitudes. Second is you can measure it, right? So there's behavior profiles and assessments. Okay. And then third, you can put somebody on point, okay, that I can identify that stuff as good intuition, right? So, like, the guys that I work with, that we employ as outsourced brand dev, Well, these are very skilled recruiters, and they can read into people's personalities, identify aptitudes. And then where there's areas of risk and unknown, have the conversation with the candidate. Hey, here's what I'm concerned about, right? You don't have sales experience. You appear to have the aptitudes. Let me tell you what sales looks like in our organization. You tell me whether you can do that every day. And if that's not your idea of a good time and you can't get up and go to work and do that every day, then this is not the right business for you. Having the straight conversation. Now, for me, I think that's the social contract, right? You're protecting their capital, okay, by identifying areas of risk up front before you take their money. And that, for me, is one of the definitions of responsible franchising. And there's many.
So that's one of them. Who owns the brand?
You can see a lot of responsible franchising. It's really attitudinal, right? It's culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easy. Sorry, it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it starts by doing the right thing.
Listening.
Yeah. For me, it starts with a commitment to doing the right thing. If you really think about it, I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but I'll give you a thought experiment, right? Okay. So what if, now we're going to bring you into World War II. Now I'm going to give you a shocking thought experiment. You're in World War II, right? Okay. Except in this universe, the Nazis won. All right. And then they exterminated everybody who would have said the final solution was bad or wrong or evil, right? So only people left alive, are people that support or got brainwashed into thinking the final solution, while maybe unfortunate, had to happen to be brought about a greater good, right? So would be killing if there's nobody left alive to disagree, right? So it would be killing innocents, bad, wrong, or evil, even if there's nobody alive to declare it so.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Would be killing innocents, even if no one's
left alive to say it's evil, right? Is it still evil just because some things are evil?
Still evil if no one knows.
So if you believe it's still evil, even though then good and evil are not a human construct, right?
Sure.
Okay. It means it's transcendent. And if it transcends humanity, in other words, we don't get to say what's right or wrong, then in that example, right? We just get to align with it, right? That's our choice. So if you bring that into franchising, I would say those transcendent principles still exist, right? So there's right, there's wrong, there's good, there's evil, okay? And we don't get to say what it is. We just get to say whether we're going to practice it, right? And if you start with the premise, right, then business doesn't become about money. It becomes about maximizing value and maximizing the good, right?
It's interesting. So I'll give you an example of this. So to me, as an entrepreneur, something that I learned was that to get to where I got to, I had to be kind of smart, but to be a very high up in private equity, you have to be really smart. But a lot of the things you eventually learn if you're in that world. So for example, I tell people there's conferences on how to award franchises, how to grow franchises, how to sell franchises. There's all kinds of conferences. There's conferences in the PE world on how to do deals, right? When to pull back, when to lower the offer. Like literally there's a science. They've done thousands of deals and they all work as a community like you're talking about, taking this brain share to come up with best practices. And something I learned was at the end of my previous transaction, there was a lot that I didn't know. And the firm, and they're great, but the private equity firms, they know these things that are very sophisticated in contracts that the average business seller doesn't know.
Yeah.
And so from that experience, I went on to learn obsessively everything that you should know when acquiring or selling a business from a transaction PE backed type of situation. And so I remember when I went to acquire Voda with our founder Dragon, saying to him, I know a lot. I don't want to pull the wool over your eyes. I want you to go get a really sophisticated attorney too, so we can make a deal that we both know everything we're signing to, right? I don't want to, just because I know it doesn't mean I want to, use it, if that makes any sense.
Right, that's right.
And it's interesting because I think to your point, the average person buying a franchise is entering into an agreement with a very sophisticated business. But later on, a year in, they get a lot further along and they bring tremendous value to the system. But the franchisor, if they go off of not the social contract that they said, but instead the franchise agreement, they can say, well, sorry, too bad. This is what you signed. And, you're essentially preying on that. Whereas if you can understand that your franchise owner is going to start off not knowing much, but over time will actually know more about the business you're in day to day than you will, because they've been in their market day to day. And by the way, I used to not think when people say my market's different, I used to think that was head trash. I couldn't disagree with that thought more. I now understand that every market does have nuances. And as a franchisor, we have to understand that we have to work within each market to tweak things. But if we went off the franchise agreement and not off the social contract that you're talking about, we would be constantly just kind of staying at the status quo. Yeah. Instead of letting and helping our franchise owners push our bar up.
That's right. And franchise is more than, we kind of tendency to think about it how to, the doing pieces. How about why? Why do we do it, right? So what's the primary motivation, right? So if the primary motivation, look, I'm not Pollyannish. There's got to be a money motivation. But I actively, one thing I learned over doing business in 40 years in franchising is I made it less about money and more about value add. Yeah. And I found the more value I could add to the marketplace, how I know I added value, that comes back in the form of money, right? So it's more being in the first give position and trying to add as much value as you can, within your skills and your capital ranges. And it will come back in money. It's been my experience. So money is a byproduct of value add and not a primary driver. And I think franchisors need to learn that.
Well, Joe, we're going to have to do a round two. We're going to have to do a part two of this. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, well done. Good interview. It's great. Now, it's great to see how well you're doing in the thought leadership position you're taking and franchising, and knowing that franchising is in good hands for the next generation, right? Which hopefully I'll be around to see, but who knows? Yeah, I just turned 61.
You don't look it. I tried, man. I try to. I'm a big fan of. I'm sure anyone at a certain position, there's controversies or whatever. But I just finished Sam Walton's book, Made in America, and I'm fascinated by Sam Walton and Saul Price. Saul Price was the pioneer. Right. And Sam learned from Saul. Jeff Bezos learned from Sam and Saul, with Amazon. I guess you could argue Amazon obsessed over the customer so much that they maybe forgot their employees. But in light of the mission.
Yeah, that's right.
I love the Warren Buffett's saying, my favorite hold period is forever. Yeah. And so, I really love what we do with franchising. And it's just to wrap up, it's like the beginning of our conversation before we hit the record button. I said to you something very candid or transparent is this business is great, but for me, I have to know that it's going to take 5 or 6 years to get to the goal, to do it the right way versus 2 to 3. And that's okay, because when you do it the right way, the value and the money comes later.
Right. That's right.
Well, thanks again. If you liked the episode, this was Joe Matthews. How do people get in touch with you, Joe?
I can visit the website, franchiseperformancegroup.com, and just fill out the contact form. And then the book is available on Amazon or in bookstores, hopefully in airports soon too. So it's the ultimate guide to responsible franchising.
I'm going to pick it up myself. Thanks again, Joe.
You're f***ing fired.
If you want to say those words to your boss, make sure you head on over to ifiredmybosspodcast.com and fill out the form to schedule a no-cost consultation. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend who might also want to fire their boss.